want to talk to you about the fact that suicide is 100% preventable and why this should be important to you. So in the United States, we have the highest suicide rate since World War II. And after World War II, it was very sad, and it was a very depressed time in our country, and there was a lot of hurt going on. And to think that our suicide rate per capita right now is as high as it was at that time is very concerning. Also, our suicide rate in the last few years has been climbing steadily by 2%. So we're not getting any better with identifying this. And in Wyoming, the licensing board has required all mental health providers to have at least 3 CEUs in suicide prevention, because this is really important. Because we have all of our prevention people out there doing things, and we're going to talk about some different things that hospitals are doing later on in this course. But our individual counselors have a huge amount of ability to impact what's going on with their clients and actually decrease the suicide rate. So I want to give you skills so that you're not timid about addressing the issue head on, and resources. And my goal is to help everybody understand how to work with people. So one of the things that I want to emphasize right now is that a clinician should never, ever, ever send their client to the hospital. It is very dangerous from your office to the hospital. So if you feel like you cannot manage their suicide risk after you've taken this course and you think they need to go to the hospital, you should follow them, you should take them, or you should call your local ambulance to pick them up. But they should never be sent from your office to the ER, because if something happens between that time, there's some risk to you for not making sure that they were safe. But I told you earlier that I've managed many suicidal people over the years, and I've never had only over about 2 people who are actively suicidal at any time. So even in my own private practice, as small as it is, I'm still able to help my own clients, to get through this crisis time, because we know it's just a matter of time. So the next part of what I'd like to talk about is the statistics, because I think these are important to helping us understand and also understand what a big problem it is, but also that the risk of somebody dying by suicide is actually a lot lower than what you think. So as we're working with people, it's not as scary if you realize, okay, not everybody that has thoughts is going to die. As a matter of fact, it's only like 10%. So that leaves a lot of area for us to really help people. So here's our suicide facts. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US, which is really sad because it's completely preventable. In 2018, so all the data is always a couple years old because that's just how the data goes, because it has to do with when death certificates are processed and that type of thing. But there were estimated 1.4 million suicide attempts. And in the year before that, in 2017, men died by suicide 3.45 times more often than women. And you're probably thinking, wow, why is that? And some of you probably think, well, it's because they have access to firearms. But there's actually a lot of research into why this happens. And, men, if they're going to do something, by golly, I'm not going to be caught not doing it right. And so they're going to get real serious about that. And women don't always use firearms or have access to it. So they're going to use other ways that aren't as lethal. And that's why there's some disparities between men and women, but it's still important to address both men and women. And then in 2018, 48,344 Americans died by suicide. And on average, there was 132 suicides every day in our country. And if you think about this as just a plane going down every day, 132 people die. That's a lot of people. And if there was a plane going down every day, we would be really outraged and want to figure out why the planes are going down. So when we look at our suicide numbers, we all need to realize this is a very serious issue, and with each one of us in our daily life, we can actually take and help mitigate the risk. So let's talk about what it's like in our state. So for Wyoming people, we're number 2. This is the list you don't want to be number 2 on. Of course, everybody's like, well, at least we're not number 1. Well, we're number 2, and that's really shameful. And I want to say for our Texas folks listening, kudos to you guys. You're 39 and on a list. 39 doesn't seem like a great number, but you guys must be doing something good down there in Texas. Maybe a little bit more sunshine and a little less altitude. You know, those things affect suicidal risk. But I just want you to see those numbers, because this is, you know, Texas people are like, whoa, that's not good to be in Wyoming, but you guys are at the conference with us. So, you know, celebrating your numbers, but also thinking maybe sometime you guys would like to try and be 49 or 50th. And Wyoming, number 2, we have so much work to do. So this is why, you know, here I am from Wyoming saying, well, let's work on this. So let's look at the numbers of the data of both of our states. So you look at Texas, Longhorn State. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death. And remember, that's preventable. So that, you know, as much as it's like, oh, it's 11th, but, you know, this is something that's extremely preventable. And on average, 1 person dies by suicide every 2 hours in Texas. So in a 24-hour period, that's like 12 people are not in the world because they had no hope. And in Wyoming, it's the 7th leading cause of death. And on average, every 60 hours. Now, I know you're like, wow, it's only every 60 hours. Well, we have a whole lot less people here in Wyoming than there are in Texas. And that's why those numbers are a little bit smaller for us. Almost 3 times as many people died by suicide in Texas than they did in alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents. And that's 4 times as many people in Wyoming. So when we think of drinking and driving as being a really huge problem, well, you know what? It's also a very, very huge problem. You know, that many people are dying by suicide. So when we look at how do we become an advocate to help prevent suicide, you know, people often say, Lorraine, it's too scary, you know, because I'm afraid I'm going to lose somebody. I'm afraid I don't have enough skills. Well, you're the person that knows your clients the very, very best in the entire world. And so you become the best person to work with them. So in 2018, here's some statistics that might make you feel better. If there were 10.7 million people who reported serious suicidal thoughts, so that's enough for us to create a safety plan, then only 1.4 actually made attempts. So that's like 10% of the people who reported thoughts actually made attempts. So when you're thinking about that, there's a lot of ways that we can work with people to help them get over those thoughts and go into the next, you know, phase of their life. There were 3.3 people who made plans, and there were 2.1 who did not attempt suicide. So, you know, they were just talking about it. So I want to be clear about the difference between thoughts and a plan and intent. So the first thing you're asking is if you've had thought, if the person has had thoughts of harming themselves or killing themselves. That's a thought. We all have thoughts. And I tell people that, you know what, sometimes I'm like, I'm having a bad day. If I just did this, I could go away. Having a thought does not mean you're going to do it. It just is kind of like a safety net. Like, okay, things got really bad, I could do this. But why that's important to address the thoughts is because those thoughts sometimes then turn into behaviors. So when we talk about the thoughts, we move on to, so if you were going to kill yourself, how would you do it? And, you know, sometimes people will give you a whole long list, or they'll say, you know, I have these 2 meds. If you take them together, they make your heart stop. And that's why those little med kits are such a good idea, because then you can send them 2 and send them home. So that's the plan. We may actually have a plan. They've thought about it. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to drive here, I'm going to run into something, whatever it is, I have a gun. You know, that's the plan. And then the next part of what we talk about is the intent. So, well, when do you think you would do this? If you were going to harm yourself, when do you think you would do this? So it's more than just the thought is there. If they also have a plan and they have a date and a time and they know how to do it, that's where, you know, when you make a plan and you guys talk about meeting more often and calling them on the weekend and doing that kind of stuff, and you've got that all in there, and they're like, no, I'm going to do it on Friday night. That's the time when you're like, all right, buddy, we tried to do this to keep you in the community. I think we need to get more help. And that's where having someone go to the hospital comes in. So I want you to know of all the times I've never even talked to anybody about going to the hospital because they were so intensely appreciative about the fact that I was willing to keep them in our counseling office and in the community because they need to work and be with their family and, you know, and not in the hospital. So I want to tell you a story about, you know, what happens in therapy and really what kind of changed when I realized I must have been doing the right thing. So I had an older client who had been in some kind of therapy or another for about 25 to 30 years. And they had a lot of stuff going on with them. And I had seen them probably over a year. And at one point, everything lined up. And I just said, hey, are you thinking about harming yourself or killing yourself? And there was a pause. And I said, all right. So here's the deal. If you say no, that's fine. We'll talk about some other stuff because I want to make sure. But if you say yes, I want you to know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and get my computer and we're going to sit down and talk about how to make a safety plan. Because I want to keep you out of the hospital. I want to keep seeing you because we've worked a long time and we have a really great relationship. And so I want to keep working with you through this. And it also might mean that we might see each other a few more times during the week. And it might mean that I might try and call you on the weekend too, if that would be okay. So I'm wondering, with knowing all of those things, that I'm going to help you make a safety plan. We're going to reschedule some appointments. I'm going to make sure that you know how to get hold of me if you need to during the daylight hours because I sleep at night, and that you know how to call the text or lifeline if it's in between times. And I want to keep you in the community. So knowing all of that, are you thinking about killing yourself? And that person, never seen tears because they're that kind of person, actually had tears and said, this was the first time that any of my counselors ever took me seriously and actually asked me. And she said that repeatedly, absolutely repeatedly over her 20 to 30 years of therapy. She was very suicidal, had a plan, and wanted to act, and no one would help her. And she was so appreciative that I was taking her seriously. So when I look at that, I think, wow, I wonder if I had clients that I did not take seriously and I didn't ask the question because I didn't know what to do. And so that's kind of been my goal, you know, after working with this person, you know, to do that. So in our next part, we're also going to go over what the safety plan looks like. And we don't use a safety contract. So that was an old school thing where you promise you will not kill yourself before our next meeting, and then they would sign it. And there is research that says that absolutely does not work. So if you or anybody in your facility is using that, that's a bad idea because there's research that it doesn't work. But a safety plan, and this is in your handout, it actually is a way for them to recognize and to start working on what other things they can do when they realize they're in crisis, down to, okay, it's serious, here's who we need to call. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. But along the line, it also might mean that you have to solicit help from other people. And help from other people is something like that person that, you know, that I had just told you about. They also had the plan that they had these 2 meds and they knew it would stop their heart. Now, I'm not a pharmacist, so I would not know that. but she had already looked it up online. She knew exactly how much to take and how much alcohol to drink at the same time. And so I was like, okay. So I said, we're going to have to get some help. So we're kind of on board with, we need to make this stop, and, we need to, get this under control, because we know if we give people anywhere from 2 to 5 days of really crisis management, that feeling will subside. So what we're trying to do is buy some time for their body and their brain to kind of calm down and get their hope back and move on. And so part of the agreement was to call her husband and right in the room, I call and say, hey, it's Lorraine the counselor. And he's like, really? Like, you don't call me. And I'm like, hey, that gun that is in the closet that's hanging up in the holster? And I mean, I knew enough. He was like, yes. I said, do you have a gun lock? Oh, yes. Oh, I got, and he got really serious, I think, about putting it in the safe or whatever he was going to do with it. And he said, is this serious? And I said, yes, it is. And I need your help right now. And would you be willing to help us on this? He's like, sure. I tell him about the med boxes, and I'm going to send Hope 2. Because did you know if you mix this medication and this medication stops your heart? And he was like, oh, so you're going to handle giving out medications until we talk again. So it's going to be a couple weeks, but you think you could do that? And he was on board. Then I also gave him, my number so that he knew how to get a hold of me if things kind of went bad. And then, we had our safety plan. I gave her copies of it. And then she gave one to her husband, and she had one in the car and some different places, and she was ready to go. So that's kind of what it looks like, this real life story of how do we stop this ideation? How do we help someone feel better in this moment? And as a kind of a logistics thing, the other thing is seeing them every other day to every third day. And I know that sounds like a really hard thing, but I'm in private practice and I have time kind of set aside to do documentation. And so sometimes that time gets wiped out and I have to do it at other times. But then I just see the person next to her. And, people are very appreciative, like, really, seriously, I can come back in again. And the other thing I do is I put a note in my house, and I'll show you what it looks like. It's this, and it says, call someone, okay? And so on the weekend, when I set that note out, and I'm going about my weekend business, my husband will stop me and say, Lorraine, did you call someone? Because sometimes I get busy and forget, and he has no idea who it is, and he is so gracious to give me that time and space to go away and to check in. And I have never talked with someone over 5 or 10 minutes on the weekend. And the people are very appreciative. And when I call on the weekend, the other thing I do is I try and call on Saturday, later in the day if I can, if my schedule allows, so that I'm not waiting till Sunday. Because if the person's like, Lorraine said she was going to call, and she didn't call, maybe she doesn't care, that's not going to help with their worry and their anxiety and their risk. So if I can call kind of in the afternoon or evening on Saturday, and they're usually really shocked to hear from me, oh, you didn't have to call me on the weekend. And I would say, oh, I know, but I was thinking about you, and I told you I would, and I really care about you. So, I'm talking to you. And usually they don't want to take up any more of my time, because they really, I think, are appreciative and really honor their professionals. That we have kind of a personal life too. But I just ask a few questions, talk, of what they're doing. Only one time, and this was during COVID, did I actually have a crisis that I was like, I don't know what to do, because we were doing all virtual. And so I actually went out to this young man's house. Now you have to make sure it's safe. This is completely rogue on everything. But there was, I knew where they lived and they were really safe people. And I made sure that someone knew where I was going, another professional. So when I came back, I called them, so they had the address and stuff. And I just went out there and we went for a walk. We walked through the barns. We sat out on the grass. I had to get eyes on this kid, because it was just really important for me to be able to see and to know what was going on. I think it also changed his thought process too, because somebody cared enough to come out. Now you have to be careful, and not all organizations would allow you to do that. But I live in a small town. A lot of people I know quite well, and that was somebody that I felt comfortable with. I didn't go in the house or anything. We just walked around outside, and it was, it was kind of a chilly day, but it was okay, and it made a huge difference in that person's life. So sometimes you have to kind of go outside the box, and what are you going to do, and how are you going to handle things when you're just on your own? And again, getting family and friends to buy in and to be a part of the process is important. The last thing I want to talk about in this segment is working with people who are chronically suicidal. So tough area. So I would say the story that I originally told you is a person who's chronically suicidal. They always have thoughts of killing themselves. And you know what? Sometimes it's those thoughts that keep them alive. And so I don't want you to be afraid of someone who's chronically suicidal. They've lived like that for a long time. Using DBT, like dialectic behavioral therapy skills, really does work on them so that you can recognize that these are your thoughts. How do you think the opposite? How do you write another story running through your head instead of this gloom and doom one? How about if you make up a happy one? Of a story when you're up in the middle of the night and your thoughts are going and you're going in this really bad direction. Could you make up a different story, just a happier one that can keep your mind busy while you're awake? It's a little bit safer of a narrative. So I know that a lot of my other counselors in the areas we talk, they're like, I'm not working with people that are chronically suicidal, but you might already be working with people that are chronically suicidal. They're just not telling you. I just make sure that I know and I'm able to support them. And sometimes letting people know that it is somewhat normal for people to have thoughts when they get in these places that are sad and are not good. So I encourage you to seek out more education, on working with those who are chronically suicidal, or just simply acknowledging the fact that you may have some of those people in your practice and you're keeping them alive already. And so that's a good thing that we kind of have to celebrate and be happy about. So I'm not sure if you have questions as we go along, since our format is kind of different. There's no way to chat. So my email address is provided at the, on your handout. And if there's anything that I've missed or that I haven't made clear, if you would like, you can email me and also look at resources. So I want to thank everybody for hanging out this long. And the next part of what we're going to do